The Winchester rifle cracked like thunder across the Montana plains, as Cecilia Thorne brought down her third elk of the season, silencing those who doubted a woman could provide for herself in the unforgiving territory of 1878. The echo bounced off distant mountains while satisfied pride washed over her sun-kissed face. "That's how it's done," she called to no one in particular, lowering her rifle and brushing a wayward strand of copper hair from her face. The homestead needed meat, and she needed no man to acquire it. The vast Montana landscape stretched before her like an endless canvas, painted with tall grasses that danced in the autumn breeze. At 22, Cecilia had earned a reputation throughout Copper Creek as the wild daughter of the late James Thorne, once the most respected rancher in the county. Since his passing 2 years prior, she'd managed to maintain the modest ranch alone, shocking the townsfolk who expected her to sell or marry immediately. Cecilia whistled for her horse, a chestnut mare named Penny, who trotted obediently to her side. With practiced efficiency, she field-dressed the elk and loaded the valuable meat onto Penny's back. The process was messy but necessary, and Cecilia worked with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this since childhood. "Let's head home, girl," she murmured to Penny, mounting with a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. The sun was beginning its descent as Cecilia approached town, the elk meat securely packed. She needed supplies from Prescott's general store before heading back to her homestead. Copper Creek was small but growing, with a few dozen buildings lining its main street, a dusty thoroughfare traveled by cowboys, miners, and the occasional stagecoach. As she rode into town, the usual whispers followed her. Women in their proper dresses, hair neatly pinned, turned to stare at the woman who wore men's trousers and could outshoot most of the men in the county. "There she goes again, riding astride like a man," Mrs. Holloway muttered to her companion as Cecilia passed. "Hunting alone, no less." "No decent woman would behave so wildly," responded Mrs. Peterson, clutching her parasol tighter as if Cecilia's independence might somehow be contagious. Cecilia pretended not to hear, though their words stung more than she cared to admit. She dismounted outside the general store, tying Penny to the hitching post and patting her neck affectionately before entering. The bell above the door jingled as Cecilia stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee, leather, and tobacco greeted her. Old Mr. Prescott stood behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his nose as he tallied numbers in his ledger. "Afternoon, Miss Thorne," he said without looking up. "Mr. Prescott," she nodded. "I need flour, coffee, sugar, and some ammunition for my Winchester if you've got it." "Running low on supplies again, are we?" he asked, finally meeting her gaze. "You know, Marshal Jenkins mentioned his son Thomas has been asking about you. Fine young man with prospects," Cecilia sighed. "I'm not interested in Thomas Jenkins or his prospects, Mr. Prescott. Just the supplies, please." The storekeeper shook his head disapprovingly but began gathering her items. Cecilia browsed while waiting, examining a new shipment of books that had arrived on the last stagecoach. The door opened again, the bell announcing another customer. Cecilia didn't look up until a deep voice with an unfamiliar accent filled the store. "Afternoon. I was told this is where a man can find decent supplies in this town." Cecilia turned to see a tall stranger standing in the doorway. He wore a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in days-old stubble. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but even beneath the layer of dirt, she could tell they were of good quality. 2 revolvers were holstered at his hips, a man comfortable with weapons, but not flaunting them like some gunslingers did. "You've come to the right place, Mr. Prescott replied eagerly. "Just finishing up with Miss Thorne here, then I'll be right with you." The stranger's eyes found Cecilia, taking in her practical attire and the smudge of blood on her sleeve from dressing the elk. Something in his gaze was different from the judgment she usually received. There was curiosity there, maybe even respect. "No rush," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick sandy hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I've been riding hard for days. A few more minutes won't make a difference." Cecilia gathered her purchases as Mr. Prescott wrapped them in brown paper. The stranger moved to examine a display of knives, but she felt his gaze return to her periodically. "That'll be $2.35, Mr. Prescott announced. Cecilia counted out the money from her leather pouch. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I'll be needing more flour next week if the Miller boys' wedding goes ahead." "You're baking for the wedding." The surprise in his voice was evident. "I can hunt elk and bake a decent cake, Mr. Prescott. Shocking, I know." She couldn't keep the edge from her voice. A low chuckle came from the stranger's direction, and Cecilia turned to find him watching their exchange with amusement. "Something funny, mister?" she challenged. "Not at all, madam," he replied, his green eyes twinkling. "Just appreciating a woman who knows her own mind." Cecilia wasn't sure how to respond to that. Most men in town either wanted to court her for her land or wished she'd conform to expectations. This stranger seemed to find her independence refreshing rather than scandalous. "Well, good day to you both," she said briskly, gathering her packages and heading for the door. "Miss," the stranger called after her. "You dropped this." Cecilia turned to see him holding up her handkerchief. She stepped back to retrieve it, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you, Mr. Sloan, Samuel Sloan, recently of Texas, presently of nowhere in particular. Cecilia Thorne," she replied. "Permanently of right here." Something in his smile made her heart skip, an unfamiliar sensation that both intrigued and alarmed her. "Good to meet you, Miss Thorne. Perhaps our paths will cross again." "Perhaps," she replied noncommittally, though something told her they would indeed. Outside, Cecilia stored her supplies in her saddlebags, still thinking about the stranger's smile. She was preparing to mount Penny when she heard raised voices from the saloon across the street. "You cheating dog!" a man shouted, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Moments later, 3 men burst through the saloon doors, 2 of them dragging the third. Cecilia recognized the Blackwell brothers, notorious troublemakers who worked at the Silver Strike mine. The man they were manhandling was a stranger to her. "We don't take kindly to cheaters in Copper Creek," the older Blackwell growled, delivering a punch to the man's stomach. The crowd that had gathered watched silently. No one interfered with the Blackwells if they could help it. Cecilia was about to mount Penny and ride away. This wasn't her fight when the saloon doors swung open again, and Samuel Sloan emerged, looking as calm as if he were taking an evening stroll. "Gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying easily across the street, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The Blackwells turned, still gripping their victim. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the younger brother spat. "Actually, it is," Samuel replied, approaching with measured steps. "You see, I was watching that game. This man didn't cheat, you did. Rather poorly, I might add." The older Blackwell released his grip on the victim and turned to face Samuel. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm stating a fact," Samuel replied evenly. "Now, I suggest you let this man go, return his money, and we can all get back to our business." Cecilia held her breath. The Blackwells weren't known for backing down, and this stranger Samuel was outnumbered. "You must be new in town," the older Blackwell sneered, reaching for his gun. What happened next occurred so quickly Cecilia almost missed it. Samuel's hand moved in a blur, and suddenly his revolver was drawn, cocked, and pointed at the older Blackwell's chest before the miner's gun had even cleared its holster. "I am new in town," Samuel agreed pleasantly, "but I'm old friends with this colt. Now, do we have an understanding?" The Blackwells exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. After a tense moment, the older brother nodded grudgingly. They released their victim, tossed a money pouch at his feet, and backed away. "This ain't over," the younger Blackwell muttered as they retreated. "It certainly is," Samuel replied, not lowering his gun until they disappeared into the crowd. The gathered townsfolk murmured amongst themselves, eyeing the newcomer with a mixture of fear and respect. Samuel holstered his weapon and helped the shaken man to his feet. Cecilia found herself still standing by Penny, watching the entire scene unfold. She should have left. Getting involved in town disputes only fueled gossip, but something about Samuel Sloan held her attention. As the crowd dispersed, Samuel looked up and caught her eye across the street. He tipped his hat to her with a slight smile before turning to escort the grateful gambler back to the saloon. Cecilia mounted Penny and turned toward home, her mind filled with questions about the mysterious stranger who displayed such calm confidence in the face of danger. For the first time in months, thoughts of something other than her daily struggles occupied her mind. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Cecilia rose with the sun as always, dressed quickly, and headed out to tend to her chores. The modest ranch house that had been her childhood home now felt too large for just one person, but she refused to give it up. 20 acres of decent grazing land, a sturdy barn, and the memory of her father's dreams kept her rooted here. She fed the chickens, milked her 2 cows, and was mucking out the horse stalls when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Visitors were rare, especially this early. Cecilia grabbed her rifle from where it leaned against the barn door, ready for trouble. To her surprise, it was Marshal Jenkins who rode into her yard, his expression serious beneath his bushy mustache. "Morning, Cecilia," he called, dismounting stiffly. At 50, the lawman's joints protested more than they used to. "Marshal," she nodded, lowering her rifle but keeping it in hand. "What brings you out this way? Heard you were in town yesterday when that disturbance happened with the Blackwells." "I witnessed it, yes, didn't get involved," the marshal nodded. "Know anything about that stranger, the one who intervened?" "Only his name. Samuel Sloan," he said. "From Texas originally." "Texas, huh?" The marshal stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Well, I did some asking around. Seems he's looking to buy land in these parts, staying at the hotel for now." Cecilia tried to appear disinterested, though the news sparked her curiosity. "Is that why you rode all the way out here, to tell me a stranger's business plans?" "No," the marshal admitted. "I came because the Blackwells were making threats at the saloon last night after you left, saying they'd teach that Texan a lesson. But they also mentioned something about that wild Thorne woman who was watching." Cecilia stiffened. "I was just passing by." "I know that, but the Blackwells have been looking for reasons to cause trouble with you since you refused to sell them grazing rights last spring. Just wanted to give you fair warning to keep your eyes open." "I appreciate the concern, Marshal, but I can handle myself," the lawman sighed. "I know you can, Cecilia. Your father taught you well. But you're just one woman alone out here, and I intend to stay that way," she interrupted firmly. "I don't need a husband or a protector, Marshal, just fair warning when trouble might be coming, which you've given. Thank you." Marshal Jenkins shook his head but didn't press further. "Well, consider yourself warned. And if you see that Texan, might tell him to watch his back too." After the marshal left, Cecilia tried to focus on her chores, but her mind kept returning to Samuel Sloan. A land buyer from Texas with a quick draw and quicker wit was an interesting addition to their small community. Not that it mattered to her, she had a ranch to run and no time for distractions. By midday, Cecilia had finished the most pressing work and decided to ride fence lines to check for needed repairs. She was halfway around her property when she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of town. The sun glinted off a black hat that looked familiar even at a distance. Samuel Sloan rode a powerful black gelding, sitting easy in the saddle like a man born to it. He slowed as he approached, raising a hand in greeting. "Miss Thorne," he called. "Hope I'm not intruding." Cecilia reined Penny to a stop. "That depends on your business, Mr. Sloan." He smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Just being neighborly. Marshal Jenkins mentioned your ranch when I inquired about available land in the area." "My land isn't for sale," she said immediately, her tone sharper than intended. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't looking to buy it, Miss Thorne. I was interested in the Davidson property that borders yours to the west. I'm told it's been vacant since old man Davidson passed last winter. Oh, Cecilia felt foolish for jumping to conclusions. Yes, that's right. It's good land, though the house needs work. So I've heard. I'm riding out to look at it now. He paused, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. The marshal also mentioned you might have had some trouble with those fellows from yesterday, the Blackwells. The marshal talks too much, Cecilia muttered. I've had no trouble yet, just a warning that they might be looking to cause some. Samuel nodded. Same warning he gave me. Thought you should know they were in the saloon last night, drinking heavily and making threats about teaching the wild Thorne woman a lesson for witnessing their humiliation. Anger flared in Cecilia's chest. I'm perfectly capable of handling the Blackwells or any other trouble that comes my way, Mr. Sloan. I don't need your concern. Instead of being offended, Samuel chuckled. I believe you are, Miss Thorne. That wasn't concern so much as professional courtesy. One capable person informing another of potential danger. His response caught her off guard. Most men either tried to protect her or dismissed her capabilities entirely. This acknowledgement of her strength was unfamiliar territory. Well, thank you for the information, she said, her tone softening slightly. My pleasure. He adjusted his hat against the sun. Since we might be neighbors soon, perhaps you could tell me about the Davidson property. I'd value a local's perspective before making an offer. Cecilia hesitated. She had planned to ride fence all afternoon, but the truth was she'd welcome the company, even if just for a short while. I suppose I could show you the boundary lines, she conceded. They're not well marked in some places. Samuel's smile widened. I'd be much obliged, Miss Thorne. They rode side by side toward the western edge of her property. Cecilia found herself stealing glances at her companion. In the bright daylight, she could see him more clearly, the strong profile, the laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often, the capable hands that held the reins with easy confidence. So what brings a Texan all the way to Montana territory? She asked as they crossed a small stream. Change of scenery, he replied. Spent 10 years ranching near San Antonio, did well enough to sell at a profit. Thought I'd try my hand further north where the land is less crowded and the water more plentiful. Ranching what? Cattle, horses mainly. I have a knack for training them. As if to demonstrate, he guided his gelding around a tricky patch of rocks with subtle shifts of his weight, barely touching the reins. That's a fine animal, Cecilia acknowledged, nodding toward his horse. Thank you. Midnight and I have covered a lot of ground together. He patted the horse's neck affectionately. Your mare looks well bred too. My father raised her from a foal, Cecilia said, a hint of pride in her voice. He had a good eye for horseflesh. The late James Thorne, Samuel nodded. His reputation extended even to Texas. Fine cattleman, they say. Cecilia was surprised. You knew of my father? Knew of him. Never had the pleasure of meeting him, but quality stock gets talked about and his name came up at auctions more than once. A warmth spread through Cecilia's chest at the casual acknowledgement of her father's skill. Most people in town now spoke of him with pity, the man who died leaving only a daughter to carry on his name. They reached the boundary between her property and the Davidson land, marked by a small creek that bubbled cheerfully over rocks. That's Davidson land beyond the creek, she explained. Good water year-round, decent grazing, and enough flat land for growing hay if you're inclined. Samuel dismounted to examine the creek more closely, testing the water with his fingers. Sweet water, he commented. No alkali. Cecilia dismounted as well, allowing Penny to drink. The house is about a mile further on. It's sturdy but basic. 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen. Samuel straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. Sounds like a good starting point. A man can always build onto a solid foundation. The way he said it, looking directly at her, made Cecilia wonder if they were still talking about the house. Most people think I should have sold my father's ranch after he died, she said suddenly, unsure why she was sharing this with a virtual stranger. They say it's too much for a woman alone. Samuel considered this, his expression thoughtful. Most people have very limited imaginations about what others are capable of. He gestured toward her rifle, securely stowed in its scabbard. That elk you brought into town yesterday suggests you're managing just fine. Cecilia blinked in surprise. How did you know it was elk? Mr. Prescott mentioned it after you left, seemed impressed, though he tried not to show it. Samuel's eyes crinkled with amusement. Said something about you being too wild for your own good, but conceded your hunting skills were paying your store account on time, which is more than he could say for some of the men in town. Cecilia couldn't help but laugh. That sounds like Mr. Prescott, disapproving but practical. Would you mind showing me to the Davidson house? Samuel asked. I'd appreciate your insights on the condition of the place. She should refuse. She had work to do, and spending more time with this intriguing stranger would only fuel town gossip. But something about Samuel Sloan made her want to prolong their conversation. I suppose I could, she agreed. I need to check my western fence line anyway. They remounted and crossed the creek, entering Davidson land. The trail wound through a pretty stand of aspen trees, their leaves just beginning to turn gold with the approach of autumn. Have you always lived in Copper Creek? Samuel asked as they rode. Born and raised, Cecilia confirmed. My father came here as a young man, met my mother, and built the ranch from nothing. She died when I was 12 influenza. I'm sorry to hear that, Samuel said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. My mother passed when I was young as well, makes a boy grow up fast. Or a girl, Cecilia added softly. Samuel nodded. Indeed. The Davidson house came into view, a simple log structure with a sagging porch but a sound roof. They dismounted and approached on foot. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, but otherwise the building had weathered its abandonment reasonably well. Needs work, Samuel observed, but nothing that can't be fixed with some effort. They entered, and Cecilia was struck by how empty the place felt. The Davidsons had no children, and when old man Davidson died, his few possessions had been sold to pay debts. Only a rough table, 2 chairs, and an iron bedstead remained. The chimney draws well, Cecilia noted, pointing to the stone fireplace. And the roof doesn't leak, at least it didn't when Mrs. Davidson was alive. She used to invite me for tea sometimes. Samuel walked the perimeter of the main room, testing floorboards and examining the window frames. Solid construction, he commented. Davidson knew what he was doing. He was a carpenter before he tried ranching, Cecilia explained. The ranching never quite took, but the house is well built. They explored the second room and the lean-to kitchen, Samuel asking practical questions about water sources and winter conditions. Cecilia found herself impressed by his thoroughness. He wasn't a man who made decisions lightly. I think this will do nicely, he finally announced. I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak to the bank about purchasing it. They stepped back outside into the afternoon sunlight. Samuel surveyed the surrounding land with satisfaction. Good grazing, water, timber for repairs, and an interesting neighbor, he said, turning to Cecilia with that dimpled smile. What more could a man ask for? Cecilia felt her cheeks warm at being included in his list of assets. Most men would ask for a more conventional neighbor, she said dryly. One who bakes pies rather than shoots elk. Samuel laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fill the empty yard with life. I've known plenty of conventional women, Miss Thorne. They have their charms, certainly, but give me a woman who can handle a rifle and her own affairs any day. Before Cecilia could respond, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. 3 riders appeared from the direction of town, and Cecilia's stomach tightened when she recognized the Blackwell brothers along with their cousin, Seth Miller, a man known for his nasty temper when drinking. Well, look what we have here, the older Blackwell, Jeremiah, called as they approached. The fancy Texan and the wild Thorne woman, all alone on abandoned property. What would the good people of Copper Creek say about that? Cecilia felt anger rise in her chest. This is Davidson land, Blackwell. You have no business here. Neither do you, the younger brother Tobias sneered. Unless you're finally looking for a man to tame you. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Cecilia, though not in a way that suggested he thought her incapable. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice pleasant but with an edge of steel beneath. "Miss Thorne was kind enough to show me the property I'm considering purchasing. Now, unless you're also interested in buying, I suggest you move along." Jeremiah Blackwell dismounted, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Maybe we are interested. Maybe we've had our eyes on this place for a while." "Then you should speak to the bank," Samuel replied evenly. "Though I understand there's already been some discussion about grazing rights that didn't go in your favor." The reference to their failed attempt to bully Cecilia into selling grazing rights clearly angered the brothers. Seth Miller spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "You think you're clever, don't you, Texan?" Jeremiah growled. "Coming in here, showing off with your fancy gunplay, making eyes at the Thorne woman." "I haven't made any special claims," Samuel replied calmly, "just exploring opportunities for a fresh start." "Well, here's some advice for your fresh start," Tobias said, sliding from his saddle. "Copper Creek ain't welcoming to outsiders who don't know their place, and it sure ain't kind to women who forget theirs." Cecilia stepped forward, refusing to be talked about as if she weren't present. "My place is on my land, running my ranch, Blackwell. And I've done it successfully for 2 years without any man's help." "That's the problem right there," Seth Miller interjected, his words slightly slurred. "Women getting ideas above their station, thinking they can do a man's job." Samuel's posture remained relaxed, but Cecilia noticed how his hand had moved closer to his revolver. "Seems to me Miss Thorne has proven she can do any job required to maintain her property. That deserves respect, not ridicule." "What do you know about it?" Jeremiah scoffed. "You've been in town, what, 2 days? You don't know nothing about how things work here." "I know bullies when I see them," Samuel replied, his voice hardening, "and I know when men try to take by intimidation what they can't earn honestly." The atmosphere tensed further. Cecilia calculated the distance to Penny and her rifle, but Tobias seemed to read her thoughts and stepped closer to the horses. "You embarrassed us in town yesterday," Jeremiah said, addressing Samuel directly now. "Made us look weak. Can't let that stand." "That wasn't my intention," Samuel replied. "Just wanted to prevent an injustice." "Well, now we're going to prevent one," Jeremiah sneered. "Going to teach you both some manners." With a quick nod from Jeremiah, Seth Miller lunged forward, grabbing for Cecilia's arm. Years of physical work had made her strong, and she twisted away, delivering a solid kick to his shin that made him howl. Simultaneously, Tobias moved toward Samuel, but the Texan sidestepped with practiced ease, using Tobias's momentum to send him stumbling forward. Jeremiah, seeing his companions failing, went for his gun. Before it cleared the holster, Samuel's revolver was in his hand, cocked and aimed. "I wouldn't," Samuel advised quietly. Jeremiah froze, his hand still on his weapon. 3 against 2, he said, though with less confidence than before. "True," Samuel acknowledged. "But I only need 1 bullet for you, and Miss Thorne seems perfectly capable of handling your friends." As if to prove his point, Cecilia drove her elbow into Seth Miller's stomach as he lunged for her again, doubling him over with a grunt of pain. The standoff might have escalated further, but the sound of more approaching riders drew everyone's attention. Marshal Jenkins appeared with 2 deputies, rifles ready. "What's going on here?" the marshal demanded, taking in the scene at a glance. "Just a disagreement about property values, Marshal," Samuel said smoothly, not lowering his weapon until the lawman was closer. "Blackwell," Jenkins turned to Jeremiah. "Care to explain why you boys are trespassing on Davidson land and threatening Miss Thorne and Mr. Sloan?" "We weren't trespassing," Jeremiah protested. "We were considering buying this place when they showed up." The marshal's expression made it clear he didn't believe a word. "Funny, because the bank told me just this morning that Mr. Sloan here made an inquiry about purchasing the property." "They didn't mention you boys at all." Seth Miller, still holding his stomach, muttered something under his breath. "What was that, Miller?" the marshal asked sharply. Nothing, Miller mumbled. That's what I thought. Jenkins turned to his deputies. Why don't you boys escort the Blackwells and Miller back to town? Make sure they go straight home and sleep off whatever put these fool ideas in their heads. The deputies nodded, moving their horses to flank the three troublemakers. This ain't over, Tobias hissed as he mounted his horse. Actually, it is, the marshal countered. Unless you want to spend a night in my jail for threatening decent folks. The Blackwells and Miller rode off with the deputies, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Marshal Jenkins turned to Cecilia and Samuel. You two all right? Fine, Marshal, Cecilia assured him. Though I'm curious how you happened to arrive just when trouble was brewing. Jenkins smiled beneath his mustache. Call it instinct. When I saw those three riding out of town looking purposeful after spending the morning drinking, I figured they were up to no good. Followed my hunch and found you. He nodded to Samuel. Quick draw you've got there, Mr. Sloan. Military training. Texas Rangers for a few years, Samuel replied. Before I turned to ranching. This new information surprised Cecilia. A former lawman explained his confidence in dangerous situations. Thought as much. Jenkins nodded approvingly. Well, I'd better catch up with my deputies. Those boys might still try something foolish. He tipped his hat to Cecilia. Miss Thorne, consider riding with someone when you're out and about for a while. Those Blackwells have long memories and short tempers. After the marshal departed, Samuel turned to Cecilia with concern. Are you truly all right? Yes, she assured him, though her hands trembled slightly from the confrontation. It's not the first time the Blackwells have tried to intimidate me. But perhaps the most direct, Samuel observed. He hesitated, then added, the marshal's advice is sound. Until those men cool down, having company when you ride out would be prudent. Cecilia bristled automatically at the suggestion she needed protection, but the events of the last hour suggested there might be wisdom in it. Perhaps, she conceded. Though finding suitable company in Copper Creek isn't easy, most men either want to court me or lecture me. Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners. What about a neighbor who simply enjoys your conversation and respects your independence? The offer was tempting. Despite the confrontation, or perhaps, because of it, Cecilia found herself increasingly drawn to this man who treated her capabilities as a matter of fact rather than an anomaly. I suppose a neighbor would be acceptable, she replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Assuming the bank approves your purchase. I have a feeling they will, Samuel said confidently. I came prepared to make a substantial cash offer. They mounted their horses and began riding back toward Cecilia's property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land, and the air had turned cooler with the approach of evening. I should thank you, Cecilia said after they had ridden in companionable silence for a while, for standing up to the Blackwells. Most men in town avoid crossing them. Samuel shrugged. I've faced worse than the Blackwells, and I couldn't very well stand by while they threatened a lady. Even a wild one, Cecilia asked with a hint of challenge. Samuel turned in his saddle to look at her directly, his expression serious. Especially one who's called too wild by people too narrow-minded to appreciate a woman of strength and determination. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Cecilia felt something shift between them, a connection forming that went beyond mere neighborly courtesy. Most men find my independence intimidating, she admitted quietly. Samuel smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek again. Most men are fools, Miss Thorne. I find your independence admirable. You're not too wild, you're just right for someone who values a woman who knows her own mind. The simple declaration, spoken without artifice or agenda, touched Cecilia more deeply than flowery compliments ever could. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly seen for who she was, not who others thought she should be. As they crossed back onto her property, Cecilia made a decision. Would you care to stay for supper, Mr. Sloan? It's nothing fancy, just venison stew, but there's plenty. Samuel's smile widened. I'd be honored, Miss Thorne, and please call me Samuel. Cecilia, she offered in return. As they rode toward her house, with the mountains painted gold by the setting sun, Cecilia felt a sense of possibility opening before her, not of dependence or compromise, but of partnership with someone who valued her exactly as she was, wild and all. In the weeks that followed, Samuel purchased the Davidson property and began repairs on the house. True to his word, he proved to be a neighbor who respected Cecilia's independence while offering companionship during her rides to check fences or hunt. The Blackwells made no further direct trouble, though their glares whenever Cecilia visited town spoke of simmering resentment. With Samuel often at her side, however, they kept their distance. As autumn deepened toward winter, Cecilia found herself looking forward to Samuel's visits. They would share coffee on her porch in the evenings, talking of horses and cattle and the books they both enjoyed. He never presumed or pushed, allowing their friendship to develop naturally. When the first snowfall came in late November, Samuel arrived with his wagon to help Cecilia prepare her ranch for the harsh Montana winter. Together they stacked firewood, repaired the barn roof, and butchered a steer for winter meat. Working side by side, Cecilia discovered that partnership with the right person didn't diminish her independence, but enhanced it. Samuel's respect for her capabilities never wavered, even as he offered his strength and skills to complement her own. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Cecilia invited Samuel for dinner. She'd baked bread and prepared a special meal, even wearing a dress instead of her usual practical trousers. When he arrived, brushing snow from his coat, his eyes widened at the sight of her in the blue dress that had been her mother's. "You look beautiful, Cecilia," he said simply. Over dinner, they spoke of their hopes for the spring, the horses Samuel planned to bring from Texas, the expanded garden Cecilia wanted to plant. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities. After they'd eaten, Samuel reached into his pocket and produced a small wooden box. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "A Christmas gift." Cecilia opened the box to find a delicately carved wooden pendant on a leather cord. The pendant depicted a running horse, its mane flowing in the wind. "I made it myself," Samuel explained. "Thought it captured something of your spirit." "It's beautiful," Cecilia whispered, deeply touched by the thoughtful gift. "Thank you." As she put it on, Samuel took her hand. "Cecilia, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination every day, it's made me realize what I've been looking for all these years." Cecilia's heart raced as he continued. "I don't want to tame you or change you," he said earnestly. "I love you exactly as you are, wild and free and completely yourself. I'm asking if you might consider building a future together as equals, not to diminish your independence, but to stand beside you through whatever comes." Tears filled Cecilia's eyes at words she'd never expected to hear from any man. "People will say you're crazy," she warned. "Marrying the wild Thorne woman," Samuel laughed, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Let them talk. I know what I want, a partner, not a possession. A woman who can shoot an elk at 100 yards and still have the gentleness to nurture a garden." His eyes grew serious again. "If you need time to consider," Cecilia silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the certainty she felt. When they finally parted, both breathless, she smiled. "I don't need time. I've found what I never thought existed, a man who sees my wildness as strength, not a flaw to be corrected." Samuel's face lit with joy as he pulled her close again. "Not too wild," he murmured against her hair, "just right for me." As snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the Montana landscape in pristine white, Cecilia and Samuel began planning their shared future, one where wildness and freedom would be celebrated, not constrained, and where love would be founded on respect and equality rather than convention. By spring, when wildflowers once again carpeted the meadows between their adjoining properties, Cecilia Thorne became Cecilia Sloan in a simple ceremony attended by those few townsfolk who had accepted her on her own terms. The whispers about her wildness never entirely ceased, but they mattered less and less as she and Samuel built their life together. In time, their ranches merged into one successful operation, with Samuel's gift for horse training complementing Cecilia's skill with cattle. They had 2 daughters who grew up learning to ride, hunt, and manage the ranch alongside more traditional skills girls who were taught that their worth came from their character and capabilities, not their conformity to others' expectations. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and they sat together on the porch watching the Montana sunset, Samuel would sometimes turn to his wife with that dimpled smile and remind her of the truth he'd recognized from the beginning, that she had never been too wild, she had always been exactly right.